1992 was a big year for Japanese media. It's a year that Doujin forever changed the landscape of Japanese gaming. Sailor Moon and Yu Yu Hakusho began airing on TV, Porco Rosso came out to theaters, JoJo Part 4 started publication, and genre titans like the rom-com Tenchi Muyo and personal mecha fave Giant Robo got their first OVA episode released. And that's still not mentioning all of the important yet less monumental releases in the cult classics, manga like X by Clamp and the shoujo classic Marmalade Boy, the Tekka Man Blade TV series, the horror adventure title Kuruta Kajitsu, and really, you could go on and on and on and on about what an incredibly understated year this was for Japanese media, just focusing on titles people might know. But as with any year in culture, one can dig deep to find more gems buried under those heavy hitters and beloved cult classics, and I think what I'm discussing today is one of those. It's a sci-fi series that few have heard of, about the blurring boundaries between humanity and technology, featuring large-scale virtual reality mecha fights, a lovable cast of characters that's daring enough to tackle trans identities in a thought-provoking way, motivating themes about pushing on no matter what, multiple erotic Doujin sequels of dubious canonicity, and it's all a tie-in to a game console about barcodes. Huh. Barcode Fighter is a 1992 to 1994 manga by Toshihiro Ono, published in the magazine Korokoro Komiku, tying into the once big-hit game console, the Barcode Battler. While Korokoro is maybe not well known outside of Japan, it has been the home to many heavy-hitter series, including Yokai Watch, Gundam Build Fighters, Beyblade, various Nintendo tie-ins, and maybe most notably, the eternally classic and beloved Doraemon series. While it's hard to say that a magazine aimed at kids ages 3 to 12 has a pedigree to it, let alone one whose ideology can be best summarized as kids only need pee-pee poo-poo jokes to entertain them, Korokoro certainly has a storied history and is fondly remembered by an innumerable amount of Japanese adults now and still loved by youths. As for Ono, he's one of those creators who's got an extensive but often unrecognized legacy, rising to some level of success in 1992 with the one-shot Zelda manga, Quark and the Fairy Queen. He's been responsible for numerous originals and tie-ins, including Neko no O, Sora no Kanata, an NTG Brothers War tie-in, and perhaps most infamously in the West, the Electric Tale of Pikachu, that one Pokemon manga that every pure Nintendo fan was not ready to witness. And if that isn't enough, this man also goes by the pen name Kamiren Jaku-senpai, and has been part of the Edo Doujin circuit for longer than some of my audience has probably been alive, crafting stories primarily focusing on femboys, trans girls, and pretty much everything fem-aligned since the early 90s, continuing on to this day with both original characters and series parodies. I honestly was not ready for what this series was or what I was getting into when I one day woke up to a DM from my friend Castell asking me if I'd ever heard of the Barcode Battler. Confusedly, I answered, yeah, I think. And then over the course of the next few weeks, we found ourselves plunging into this absurd rabbit hole of questionably canonical Edo manga sequels, a forgotten toy line, and this one manga series of an incredible trans rep that somehow exceeds a lot of representation today, and nobody talks about it! But look, I'm here with massive assistance from Castell for research, translation, and many other things to set the record straight. Barcode Fighter is the best battle shonen you haven't read, it's one of the best trans manga you haven't read, and its extended universe is so incredible and vast that every single one of you who has clicked on this video needs to know, because it's an absolute crime this series hasn't been translated or made known outside of Japan. Hell, even in Japan it's still pretty obscure. The only reason that I know about it is because Castell found a blog post by the Needy Girl Overdose developer talking about how utterly bizarre the whole thing is, which I can agree to that wholeheartedly, but if I just left the manga at "it's weird," then I wouldn't be doing any justice to how goddamn interesting and cool it is. So, without any further ado, let's dive into this forgotten mecha manga classic, take a deeper look at its themes and stories, and find out just why this manga is still worth your time almost 30 years later. Our story takes place in then-contemporary Japan, albeit with one big twist. The technology has advanced far enough to allow for massive facilities known as game domes, hosts of the newest trend that's sweeping the nation: virtual reality mecha fighting. These fights are powered by the mysterious technology of barcodes, with kids all around the world attempting to understand the inner workings of these systems to create stronger and stronger mechs in hopes of becoming a true barcode fighting champion. One such kid is our protagonist, Kodoretsu, a young and bright guy who, after being introduced to this game by his close friend Sakura, has only one dream in his life: to become the best barcode fighter there ever was. A goal easier said than done, as he's not the only one with such lofty dreams. There's many others that may become friend or foe depending on the time and place, some who only want a good fight, some who only seek power, and some who may know deeper secrets about the power of barcodes. Computer gods, grand tournaments, technologies of incredible power, and an ever-complicating historical web tying it all together that's more than anyone could have ever bargained for, let alone a couple of kids who are still trying to make sense of the world and their own complicated lives and dreams. And yet, they might just be the only ones who can save that world. Barcode Fighter's story is fundamentally pretty normal for a battle shonen. A bright-eyed kid who wants to be the best at fighting and the quirky friends he makes along the way get involved in something far larger than any of them could imagine despite some initially small beginnings, all while battling new foes in a monster of the week type format. It's a good base to work from, and the series expands on that in every way while still somehow working around the core fact that this is a tie-in manga to a forgotten game console. Barcode Fighter was ostensibly made to sell Barcode Battlers, a game console toy line started in 1991 and developed by Epic Co., centered around the idea of finding barcodes to scan into warriors that you can fight your friends at the computer with the lore justification being something about a barcode nebula and an evil emperor, which doesn't really matter here. All pre-existing lore about the Barcode Battler is thrown out the window to instead create an original story, one that incorporates the base rules of how the console functions and focuses on the real-world social aspects of the toy, fighting friends, making new rivals, getting better barcodes, and all with a healthy dose of extrapolation added on. Rather than being an accurate and boring representation of what playing on the Barcode Battler is like, the manga hones in on the kind of imagination kids tend to have with toys like this, taking abstract numbers and turning them into grandiose fights in their head, and putting it to paper as the reality within the fiction. As a result, we went from this...
Oh yes, I have 3 numbers.
...to this! It seems like the only restrictions Epok gave to Ono were that the Barcode Battler must somehow be involved in the main plot, things have to be tangentially related to barcodes, and that there has to be product placement where possible, all of which are worked in pretty seamlessly, with the Battler serving as the main way in which people fight, with its various incarnations and quirks being used to move the plot along. I'm very glad Epok gave Ono the freedom to take so many creative liberties, because it means what we got here wasn't confined to work within what seemed to be a rather boring throwaway sci-fi plot, but rather whatever he wanted it to be with whatever characters he wanted to write. The result is a series overflowing with passion and love for what he was creating. Kick-ass shonen mecha fights with an endearing and lovable cast of characters. It's kept pretty small and only lightly increased throughout the runtime, with the core group remaining quite consistent. You got our hero Retsu, his friend Sakura, the rivals turned friends of Kai, Shin, Aya, Sotetsu, Takumi, and Steve, the mentor Gaku, and a couple of villains who are sometimes one-offs and sometimes recurring threats. It's standard stuff, but everybody's got strong chemistry and a shocking amount of development even when they're simply minor characters. No one here feels truly one-note, and that goes doubly so for those who are part of the main cast. Retsu is the perfect hot-blooded hero. Always ready for a fight, always there for his friends, and always high on life, he's a lovable little dude that undergoes a lot of development in a variety of ways. Sometimes simply fighting is enough to make him stronger, other times encounters he has with other people inspire him, and other times he just needs to have the shit kicked out of him to improve. It's always inspiring to see him get right back up when he's knocked down, and winning not through luck but through training and simply learning the game, and his opponents better to have fairer fights. He's the kind of guy one loves fighting in a duel and loves having as a recurring rival, knowing whoever faces him will be pushed to their limits. And outside of all the shonen shenanigans, he's a joy to see interacting with the rest of the crew. Sakura is the other mainstay character for the whole run, a lovable and lively gal who plays a pivotal role as both a fighter and a key pillar of support to Retsu. She motivates him when he's down, is integral to him learning the game, and without her he wouldn't be able to accomplish half of what he does. She is also the trans character and fascinatingly handled. Once it's revealed towards the end of the first half, there's a surprising amount of attention paid to it and a lot of clever gags that mostly stay respectful to her character. Together, the two take on a whole number of foes that often become friends in due time, with some personal favorites of mine being Kai for his unbelievably strong character arc, and the American boy Steve with his quirky speech mannerisms and ever-radiating aura of Americanness, down to his blonde hair and his mech being called Captain USA. It's a ton of fun to watch all these characters go from friendly and sometimes unfriendly rivals to forming easy and uneasy alliances for greater good when bigger threats come up, such as rascally groups of kids or the series' main recurring villain, the Barcode Emperor, a computer virus hiding dark secrets about the true nature of barcodes. All of the fights in this series that settle the conflicts between good and evil, friend and foe, are, put simply, fucking rad. Ono's knowledge of the medium, how to lead viewers around, use panels effectively, effectively and employ dialogue to pace the speed of reading is downright impressive and utilized so well that every single fight is engaging and makes you want to keep reading until there's nothing left to take in. The pace of these battles makes them enthralling, slowing down as characters make tactical decisions based on their capabilities, speeding up as the combat becomes intense and turns to pure action rather than thoughtful decision, and often culminating in full-page artwork or a 2-page spread with incredible detail to emphasize the impact of a particular move or to make the end of a fight feel truly climactic. Not only that, but each fight feels as if it's making full use of each character's abilities, their mech designs, and their knowledge of combat. And one of my personal favorite examples of this is with the design of Retsu's main mech, the Dash Beetle 2, a horned behemoth with impressive armaments both long-range and close-up, including its horn. In a fight about a third of the way through the series, Retsu gets into a battle with the new girl in town, Aya, a pro-wrestling-loving lass who incorporates that into her fighting style, piloting the Ring Star. After getting utterly fucking pummeled the first time, he comes back soon after for a rematch in which neither of them are allowed to use long-range weapons, resulting in a fast-paced duel where each of them take calculated blows at each other. Retsu, being far more inexperienced in this, gets beat badly early on, with Dash Beetle 2 losing both of its arms. With seemingly all hope lost, Aya is about to seal the fate of the fight by ripping off its horn, which turns out to be a fatal mistake, as Retsu pushes Dash's horn into Ring Star's body, suplexing its body with just its legs and driving its horn into Aya's mech, pinning it to the ground and spelling defeat. Shit like this happens all the time in the series, and it never stops being exciting due to the variety in the combat. While everything feels cohesive within the series, the style of fights feels as if they run the whole spectrum of real to super robot. Some are like the aforementioned visceral and brutal pro wrestling duel between Aya and Retsu, while others are slower, more deliberate and tactical, and yet others lean entirely into pure shonen, with here too unforeseen special moves being revealed on the fly and massive cratering impacts being left in the wake of 2 or more people dueling at their fullest potential. Each of those people fights in a way that feels truly unique to their personality, adding some character that can't be expressed purely through dialogue, only through potent, striking artwork. Which, speaking of, this series looks a ton better than you might expect from its tie-in nature. There's countless jaw-droppingly good spreads, an impactful sense of weight, a visceral feeling to each hit endured, and an overall sense that this series was crafted with a lot of love for the mecha genre. Each mech is stylistically unique, but never feels out of place when put against another, and even though I'm not sure if I'd say many of them are anything greater than just pretty cool, there are some serious standouts like the Dash Beetle 2 and Fisher King. It gets even better once combiner robots become a mechanic, making for some pretty sweet, often one-off designs. Ono's talents for quality art extends into the slice-of-life parts of the story too. You got a whole gluttony of memorable character designs that stand out from one another with ease on a crowded page, some surprisingly pretty scenery at points, and an impressive ability to portray subtle emotions through facial expressions, body language, and paneling. The balance between these two parts is well done, with the series channeling a whole gamut of emotions. You got your hot-blooded mecha action that never stops being exciting to watch, but it's also able to be quite heartwarming, sincere, frightening, suspenseful, and other times chill as all hell, all without ever giving the viewer some bad tonal whiplash. It's also pretty comedic in the middle of all these things too, with regular visual and written gags that I personally never felt to be overbearing or distracting from other emotions at hand, partly due to the rather self-serious tone of the series. And no one breaks the fourth wall to reference how utterly benign barcodes are in real life, and the series doesn't make fun of how admittedly absurd its lore and concepts are. It's all treated earnestly and like you should be thinking of what happens as a big deal within the context of the plot. It makes for a breezy, fun read, complemented by how good the pacing is. The plot never feels like it's flying through events and characters to get to the next big fight, nor does it feel like things drag out or that you just want to get a move on. It's fast, steady, and keeps everything from dialogue to combat engaging through a firm understanding of the medium's basics. The simplicity of the language used helps with this too. Being a manga aimed at a younger audience, the level of Japanese needed to read this is what I'd consider lower intermediate, and as someone past that point, I found it extremely easy to sit down and fly through without ever getting confused on what was happening. There's also a lot of subtle context presented within the art that makes acquiring language for reading far less challenging than it might be in other materials and other manga. That said, the actual story all of this is put into practice with is, well, if I had to describe Barcode Fighter's plot in one word with a little help from expletives, it would be this: Fucking hinged. This is a series that goes from a kid learning about and improving at an arcade game his friend introduces him to an extravagant battle for death and life against a computer force that blurs the line between reality and digital worlds, with subplots ranging from dealing with evil rapscallions to realizing the complexities of gender due to crushing on a trans girl. And of course, there's a ton of deep lore behind all of it. I won't spoil everything because it's best experienced firsthand, but it's kind of hard to really sell just how wild this gets without mentioning at least a bit. For instance, barcodes aren't just a way to store data about products and computer data in this world, but actually tie back to an ancient civilization that took barcodes one step further with the bio-barcode, which could be used to store and transform data about human bodies, serving as the basis for technology to even store and warp the soul and consciousness of a human. This all comes back once the Barcode Emperor becomes involved in the plot, who happens to be one of these bio-barcode beings, now wreaking havoc as an evil computer virus seeking the strongest barcode fighter in the world, which happens to be Retsu, and also requires the involvement of his mentor Gaku, who has a long storied history of this being and the bio-barcodes tying back to his father's archaeology. Also, he looks like Domon from G Gundam despite this predating G Gundam by a few years. I'm not sure how that happened. This is not even getting into things like how the bio-barcode technology was sold to corporations to create full immersion VR, or some of the genuinely unsettling horror elements of people having their bodies and minds modified using this tech against their will, and people being absorbed into computers like a Digimon series. I said this series gets unhinged, and I mean it. But as I said before, the tone is really what makes all of this work. While I did find myself laughing at how wild it could get, that was honestly more out of excitement and hype for how far it was willing to go with a very simple premise, rather than thinking whatever was happening was dumb in a way. All of the different elements from the slice of life, the lore dumps, the mechanical details, and the crazy mech fights work together to tell one solid story. A kid and his friends on a journey they couldn't have imagined embarking on. A barcode fighter doesn't just stand head and shoulders above most kids' manga, but it stands above a lot of other shonen series too, just for its capability to commit to dumb bits without going too far as to be unbelievable by its own rules, or stretching itself thin with bad filler arcs and forgettable characters. Sure, there's maybe some moments here and there that aren't perfect, but as a whole it's damn tight and engaging, being viscerally entertaining enough to hold the attention of kids while still having enough character and thematic depth to be entertaining to older readers. At its core, Barcode Fighter is about facing the challenges of the world head on rather than running away. Even if you get knocked down and hope seems lost, there's always a way forward and there's always a way to improve yourself. It is pretty standard, but it's something that resonates with me a lot, and I really enjoy the way it's explored, particularly with regards to Sakura and her trans identity. The series spends an extensive amount of time on how kids process the idea of trans identities and the kinds of struggles that trans people face in their social lives, as well as sometimes touching on gender dysphoria, all while regularly affirming Sakura's identity as what she claims it to be and portraying the denial of it as patently wrong. If I had to compare this series to anything, it would probably be Clamp's Cardcaptor Sakura. That series too is a kind of villain of the week affair that reaches beyond the usual young kids demographic content to handle complex and risque social issues, albeit far more frequently than Barcode Fighter and maybe closer to what most kids are familiar with. It crushes with age gaps, curiosity about sexuality, living with unrequited love, and having a flying creature yammering in your ear with a kansai ben, all set over a shoujo action backdrop. Difference is, Barcode Fighter is a shonen series that finished its run 2 years before Cardcaptor's 1996 debut, and Cardcaptor is a shoujo, a genre much more known for its history of handling LGBTQ topics. While works directed at girls in Japan have a long-running history of gay themes, running at least as far back as the 1910s, the revitalization of shoujo manga in the 1970s thanks to series like Rose of Versailles pretty much cemented that as an aspect of the genre, only becoming more and more prevalent with time both inside it and outside. Comparatively, shonen's gay awakening up through the 90s stayed within the realm of what are now broadly referred to as otoko-no-ko characters in some Japanese subcultures, which can be contextually translated in a whole number of ways, but we'll work off of what's in the Japanese Wikipedia list of such characters. Anyone assigned male at birth that displays femininity in some major way. That might just be having very feminine mannerisms or a feminine appearance, or it may be all the way to being outright trans femme simply grouped in due to a lack of precise language. It's a term with a very complicated history that's been portrayed poorly by bigots over the years, and I recommend reading the short paper Prefiguring the Otoko-no-ko genre by Riley Luiki for a more detailed view of things than I can give. Barcode Fighter predates not only this term, but the introduction of transgender as a loan word in the language and the translation of the now outdated diagnoses of gender identity disorder. At the time it came out, Japan was in the middle of a gay boom concerned far more with the AIDS epidemic and the rights of people who were in some way attracted to the same sex, while trans concerns took a backseat as they seemed to everywhere else in the world at that time. This isn't to say these things didn't exist before in Japan, because that's absolute bullshit, but rather that this manga predates and or is concurrent with the very early evolution evolution of modern-day trans concepts in the country, and on the media side, it came out in a time where shoujo ruled the gaze, and Shonen was more concerned with cracking terrible jokes about guys and trans girls confusing people. Of all the series to feature one-off and recurring bits classified under Otokonoko, Hisashi Eguchi's Stop Hibari-kun is probably the one besides Barcode Battler that got the closest to being an actual trans narrative before the seinen series Wandering Sun came out in 2002. A drama explicitly, and depending on your feelings about it, delicately, discussing the lives of trans people. Hibari-kun, by contrast, is anything but delicate. It's a parody of rom-coms where a young boy called Saku Sakamoto ends up living with a Yakuza family following the tragic passing of his mother, adjusting to life with them and reconciling with his crush on the boss's trans daughter, Hibari, with most of the gags being about how the world treats her and her persistence despite that. If there's anything that could be pointed to as a potential inspiration for Ono deciding to tackle trans narrative within Barcode Fighter, it's probably this series. Many of the gags about Sakura within Barcode Fighter feel like they were cut from a similar cloth, and the narrative force of a boy who loves a trans girl that they see as a boy is here too, albeit taken in a wildly different direction. Because of this, Sakura had basically everything stacked against her as a character: an author who seemed to draw more from Otokonoko manga than progressive shoujo works, a public that barely understood trans issues, a magazine that lives by pee-pee-poo-poo fundamentalism, an audience who was fought to care more about action and jokes and interpersonal drama, and to top it all off, it's just a battle shonen about kids saving the world that ties into a toy. It's not an LGBTQ manga like Wandering Sun. And that's really what makes this so impressive, both for the time it was released and even now as a piece of fiction with a trans character. Every character and their dilemmas are given equal importance, and it just so happens that one of those characters deals with real-world trans issues, and the other kids around her also have to deal with changing their understanding of gender to fit with that. Which, for the record, kids are often really damn stubborn with changing, and they can be not so great at expressing things even when their heart is in the right place. But Ono seems to not only know this, but is willing to use it to both better communicate with the readers in a way that they'd understand, as well as to realistically represent how someone cis in their early teens might struggle a lot to understand their trans friend and eventually end up somewhere that, while not perfect, at least gets it with what little knowledge and limited vocabulary he has. While the big twist isn't revealed until the midpoint of the series, when it is unveiled, it's in a pretty shocking way. One day when Reitsu and Ko are headed to an onsen, Sakura is hesitant to head into one of Aya for seemingly no reason, only for that reason to be found out as soon as she's pushed to undress, and it's revealed she's got different parts. This leads to her being called a slur by Kai, who had crushed on her, as Reitsu steps in to defend her, but Kai defends his language of asserting that Sakura being a man is just a reality. This is, of course, settled in the only way they know how: a duel over trans rights, with Reitsu winning and Kai swiftly apologizing for how he acted to her. This plot does not end here, however, and Sakura's transness is important to the story until the series ends. It comes up many times throughout, sometimes as a not-so-great gag, and sometimes in ways that show people willing to stand up for her even when she's bullied. The most pivotal plot involving her character, however, and one that had me sobbing by the end, comes towards the very end of the series. After full immersion VR becomes a thing in the universe, Sakura ends up playing this RPG title called Holy Mountain, where upon entering her name and her preferred gender, she's thrown into a typical fantasy world as the captive princess with a cis woman's body. With her mind completely absorbed into the game, the only way to get her out is if Reitsu and Ko can take on the role of the adventuring party, defeat the demon lord, and free her from her bondage. The whole arc is this very cute parody of games like Dragon Quest III down to the Yusha Mao trope, and the party of tank, healer, archer, warrior, which in and of itself is a blast. But it's the way so much emphasis is played on Sakura's character that makes it memorable. Although the role of being a captive princess isn't much fun, there's comfort in her being immersed in a world in which you can have the stereotypical idea of attractive woman's body. Large chests, wide hips, and all, the things a lot of trans girls worry about not having, as people often look to them to visually sex somebody, as well as a world where she can dream of being saved by her Yusha and live out a wonderful life. And this is where Kai comes back in, because his character arc doesn't end at apologizing to Sakura. Throughout the series, he's in the background, struggling to reconcile his crush on Sakura as a woman while having difficulty coping with what he sees as a reality. She was born with a boy's body and therefore must be a boy. There's no other way. The big revelation for him comes once he joins the fledgling hero's party and gets to be the one who rushes in to save Sakura. He's greeted by her, scantily clad, thanking him for saving her, while an entire life with this perfect woman Sakura flashes before his eyes. Getting married, having kids, growing old together, and then a dream about an earnest conversation with her.
Sorry, Kai.
What's the sorry for, Sakura?
Well, you know.
Everyone's got some stuff they don't want the world to see, and you feel like you're naked right now. Of course you'd be bummed out about it. Anyway, I'm glad that I met you. You taught me a lot of important things. I never realized just how huge the world is.
You're just exaggerating.
I ain't. Sakura. Sakura. I am the Sakura I love. Sakura is a man! The Sakura I'm in love with is a man! I don't care if you're a dude, you're already feminine enough the way that you are now, and you shouldn't escape into a video game. All you need is the self-confidence to live in reality. There's always gonna be people who won't get it, but if you ruin your life just to make those losers happy, that's gonna be a tragedy. Sakura, let's go back to reality together.
Thank you, Kai.
Knowing Kai's character arc and struggles with moving past the gender binary, and knowing the way the story goes at every length to defend Sakura as a woman through people standing up for her and beating the hell out of anyone who doubts her femininity, I think you'd have to be stretching hard to read this as anything but Kai accepting Sakura as a woman, regardless of what the oppressive and useless gender and sexual binary he's been raised with says. It's a kid expressing a very mature sentiment with language he doesn't have. Let's once again keep in mind the target audience for Korokoro Komiku. It was aimed at kids 3 to 12 years old, and I can sure as hell tell you that my understanding of the gender binary was not any more complicated than Kai's when I was 11 years old, and that trans metaphors and discussions of gender beyond my understanding flew way over my head. That's not the fault of anyone who tried to teach me or any media that tried to inform me, but rather that if you're born with strict and absurdly simplified ideas of how the world should be, it can be hard to move out of those into the open-mindedness needed to grow a better understanding of complex subjects. Of course, this doesn't excuse bullying or spouting harmful and dangerous rhetoric. There's no justification for harassing people or making the lives of others worse just because you don't get their identities. Despite growing up in a generation of far more information about sex and gender than any other, and despite doing my best to be kind to people living outside the binary as a young teen, I still struggled to reconcile with the idea of transness and gender nonconformity. Anything more than a binary view seemed complex, confusing, contradictory, and scary to accept, especially in struggling with my own sexuality that was torn apart due to abuse and gender that my family and friends wouldn't let me express. It was only after a lot of discussions with someone dear to me and realizing that I myself was trans that I was able to form the understanding that I have now. I can't imagine that kids growing up in 90s Japan with little exposure to LGBTQ characters would have had any more complex of an understanding of trans people than Kai here, and perhaps even less for those who grew up cisgendered and heterosexual without ever thinking for a second there could be something more to it. So I think this representation of how someone grows out of a sexual binary isn't just impressive for kids media, but it's an impressively complex representation of it, period. Kai's way of mentally processing this, saying that it doesn't matter if Sakura is a boy because she's already feminine enough, is a way more realistic step out of the binary way of thinking than if he were to suddenly forgo the entire idea of physical sex mattering. Does this mean he's right? I mean, no, he's a kid of a simple and clouded view of gender identity trying to express something really complicated for him. Sex is a lot more complex than genitals and chromosomal pairs, and gender is a complex social construct built out of a million moving parts. Intangible and tangible, psychological and physiological, ebbing and flowing with the tides of individual societies, communities therein, and life experiences. Why I love Kai's arc in this scene so much is that it's a realistic reflection of the kinds of things that many kids believe and struggle with, and what matters is at the core of what Kai is saying and where his character has ended up. By the end of this chapter, he's reached an acceptance of Sakura for who she is, despite not having the words for it. The Sakura born with a quote-unquote boy's body is Sakura, a Sakura that's already plenty girl enough no matter what, and this fantasy of her as a cis woman isn't any more woman than she already is. How the fuck did we get here in 1994? How did this series about barcodes and ancient civilizations and computer viruses manage to have not only one of the best trans girl reps, but some of the best representations of how people grow from and out of transphobia into accepting their feelings and realizing how complex sex and gender is in a way that feels representative of the way kids sometimes work through it? It's also just such a cool way of expounding on the series' core theme of facing life head-on. It's something that Sakura ponders before she gets into the VR game, as wondering if Retsu would love her more if she were more of a woman. And as mentioned, there seems to be something nice to her about running away from all the dysphoria and the doubts in a fantasy world. But like Kai tells her, it doesn't matter what a bunch of bastards think. What matters is her being confident in herself, confident in the reality of her being a woman no matter what. This really doesn't feel like something from the early to mid-90s. This feels like something that would have come out in at least least the early 2000s, but despite its age, it somehow handles this incredibly complex topic better than a lot of modern media. And the most wild part is, we were just a couple bad decisions away from this not happening. Ono mentions in a brief bonus section of the first half's tankobon that the first 2 drafts of the trans reveal chapter were just cheap jokes about Sakura tricking guys. These promptly got scrapped upon him realizing, wait, shit, fuck, this is an actual character. What if I write an actual character? And you know what? I'm glad he did. I don't know how intentional it was for all of these complexities in Sakura's character to exist. I don't know how much he really meant to capture the young trans experience from the rejection by peers to the confusion about gender to the joy of being accepted, but he somehow tapped into all of it brilliantly, and I could not be happier for it. Frankly, this whole manga just makes me happy. It's a wild, absurd ride from start to finish with an incredible cast of characters, kick-ass mecha fights, top-notch art, a great sense of humor, and a self-serious tone that makes even the most absurd things believable and hype as fuck, capped off with a surprisingly solid ending despite being cut short. There were, of course, a lot of theories behind the manga ending abruptly. Some people throughout the years have posited that it was due in part to the manga being too horny in places and too LGBT, but given the absurd horniness of other manga in Korokoro, such as The Electric Tale of Pikachu, as well as manga like Robopon and competing magazines, it's likely that had nothing to do with it. The actual reason behind the cancellation, according to Ono in the second half's tankobon, is that it just wasn't popular anymore. The Barcode Battler's hype had dwindled, and since this manga existed primarily to promote it, there wasn't a reason to continue the story anymore. So I think it's safe to say that the trans issues and the horniness had nothing to do with it because, again, Electric Tale of Pikachu exists, and Ono continued getting work for a long while after this manga. In the middle of that work, however, Ono would continue the Barcode Fighter story on in quite a different form. Erotic manga. But before we get to the absolute absurdity that follows, I'd like to take a moment to shout out and appreciate my lovely patrons who keep me funded and making content like this. It's that time of the month again, folks. Life updates, shoutouts, a little bit of VN news, and Patreon Q&As. Things have been still kind of a mess on my end, mainly grappling with mental health and general life struggles, but I'm ebbing and flowing with the negatives getting less strong over time. Still, I am sorry videos have been delayed a bit because of this. I want to try and get things back on time, but between that and the scope of production sometimes spiraling out of control like it did with this video a bit, it gets hard. Part of me has considered maybe switching to an as-they're-done type of schedule for my videos, but I feel like trying to have a vague idea of a monthly schedule forces me to keep on top of things and try new ideas. I guess we'll see where things go depending on audience response to that possibility and how hectic larger video productions get, but for now I want to try and keep this form. Once again though, I have to shout out all my amazing patrons for their contributions to keeping me going and keeping this alive. At the time I'm writing this, we have just about hit 880 USD monthly, which is getting past the point where I'm living paycheck to paycheck, which is just fucking amazing to me still. Thank you all so much. I'm still not over the joy I felt last month from having real financial security, knowing I can cover food and groceries and medical expenses and rent without panicking over when my next job will be is a huge, huge relief compared to the freelance life I used to live. And like always, I want to try and give back to the community by shouting out people who inspire me to keep creating and are just plain cool. We have 2 very neat people this month. The first is Sage Must Die, a cool dude who's been making videos for a while and recently put out a few bangers that hit the sweet spot of incredibly offbeat things that I didn't know I needed a video on, but now I can't live without. The best example of this is their most recent video on new metal in video games, which is just well scripted, funny, tightly edited, and overall a blast. If you get a chance, I recommend checking his stuff out. It's great. The second is Voxandra, a VTuber streamer who sometimes makes videos, and all of her content that I've seen is fantastic. I will admit that I haven't watched a lot of her streams since it's very rare that I watch streams at all, but the clips I've seen are a blast, her picks for games are great, her personality is fun, and the videos she has on Live Alive and Saga Frontier sold me on those with ease. They're just incredibly enjoyable. Also, she provided the voice of Sakura in that segment that I voiced Kai in, which I'm extremely grateful for. So show her some support if you can, check out her streams because they're a blast, watch her videos, and maybe throw some subs her way. Finally, I have 2 patron questions to answer. The first coming from Nordy, who asks, how is Amelie Doree pronounced? I've been pronouncing it as,
Amelie Doree.
but I'm realizing that's probably incorrect. So I can't read IPA worth shit, but according to the online pronouncer, that's almost correct. It's either Amelie Doree or Amelie Doree. It completely depends on my mood and like what the fuck comes out of my mouth at that point, but yeah, either one of those. Fun fact, the name actually came from bashing together my middle name and then the name of some obscure Sega Saturn 3D weapons fighter thingy called Alondere. I don't know how to properly describe it. Editing me is gonna put it like on the video or something, and you'll be able to like see the game properly for description. Still, that is, I think, the most me thing I could have done. I picked the name literally just at random because I was making a channel, didn't know what to call it, and just went, fuck it. What's a video game I played recently? Yeah, okay, put that with my middle name. It works. And yeah, I guess it worked. It's like fairly recognizable, certainly a lot more than other names I've had. The second question comes from Rosabella Melantha, who asked, probably somewhat random question, but do you have any opinions on the Sunless Seas, Sunless Skies games? So I've heard of these probably once or twice in my life before this. I think I watched the video Mandalore did at some point, and I've found them really captivating, but just haven't had the chance to get around to them. That said, this comment did make me look deeper into them, and they've got my interest for sure. Maybe people would be interested in occasional videos on not Japanese narrative-driven titles like this. I'd be down to do that sometime, even though I mostly want to keep this channel mostly focused on eroge and things that feel vaguely adjacent to it. Like, I realize this video is a little bit of departure because it's about a manga, but I don't know, this just feels so in the spirit of the channel, especially with what's coming up in a moment, that I just had to talk about it. I could not pass this up. Lastly, I do want to mention a little VN news. Not to drag this segment out too much longer, but I have to mention the release of the Future Radio and Artificial Pigeons in English, which I've seen a lot of hype for, and hey, game looks pretty cute. But most importantly, Rance 9 is almost out in English finally. I am still barreling my way through earlier titles, but goddamn am I happy to see more of this franchise in English, and I can't wait to make my video on 01. It's still in production, I promise. I have so fucking much to say about that game, and really the entire series. It's a lot. Alice Soft is something. That's all for now, and again, thank you so much to all the cool people on screen who have been scrolling by that donated. Y'all are amazing, and I wouldn't be here without you. If you want to help support me financially too and be part of the on-screen gang, then consider donating monthly via Patreon or one-time via Ko-fi. But if you can't or aren't interested in providing, that's totally fine. Just liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing the word of my videos helps so much. I don't want to force anybody into donating. I just appreciate literally any support, even views, and just whatever. It blows my mind people like this shit so much. Thank you all again, and back to the show. Also, this is gonna get a bit unhinged, and I'm sorry. I mentioned in the intro that the man's long done work under the name Kamirenjaku Sanpei, and some of which a few viewers may even recognize depending on how deep you are in the Ero Doujin rabbit hole. We are not here to do a full dive into the man's career though, as much as that'd be equal parts amusing and mind-breaking. We're here to see how Barcode Fighter's characters lived on past their runtime, and thankfully there's a pretty decent amount of content out there to go over, some quite mundane, others utterly batshit, and as the kids say, the first 3 bits of side and successor content were compiled into a book called Sakura Jiru in 1997, which is well, actually not that exciting. We do learn through these, however, that apparently Sakura is an only child with no father in her life, and we also see the start of Retsu growing distant from her, something that's gonna become a recurring trend. And, of course, there's tons of almost everybody banging. The real important sequels wouldn't come out until much later, released over the course of 15 years after the original series had ended. We'll return to the first 2 of these later as they chronologically occur later, and focus on the last Ero manga released so far, Anal Angel, the thrilling canonical continuation to Sakura's character, assuming you count these as canonical. Some people don't, but look, I'm not a Barcodian, I'm just reporting what I see, I'm not here to debate canonicity. Beginning its run in Otoko no Kokurabu in late 2009 before moving into Komiku Masho shortly after, it's important to note that this is, first and foremost, an Ero manga designed to excite, so the story here is expectedly thin. That said, what it does add to the world of Barcode Fighter is very curious. The main thing that's changed between that series and this manga is that Retsu has changed quite a bit, seemingly. You see some of this in Sakura Jiru, where he seems to think of Sakura more as a guy there, but in here they outright state that's what he sees her as, which, well, it's kind of sad given his characterization in Barcode Fighter, but maybe he's just going through his political centrist phase. At the very least, he's not so bad that Sakura doesn't still hang out with him, as she straight up ditches school and her polycule at one point to save the world with him. So with Retsu mostly out of the picture, Sakura gets half the focus, having now turned into the biggest slut known to humankind with the help of her teacher Aoi, and it's seemingly her goal now to do the deeds as much as possible, whenever possible, and this includes follows the bratty drill-haired Kohai Yuzu and her other Kohai Kurumi, who takes the place of the male protagonist with Reitsu now out of the picture. The whole manga is as much about Sakura as it is him, with the 190-page, 10-chapter run detailing his slow ascent from not understanding why Sakura is hot and being confused about her gender, to he herself transcending into loving being a girl and becoming a Koumon Tenshi alongside her. It's all very silly, barely coherent, but it's a gender-fucking good time. Much like Barcode Fighter itself, there's a self-serious but lighthearted atmosphere where utterly absurd things are happening left and right, but no one really questions it too deeply. The setting just happens to be a school that got filled up with otokonoko at one point, people have lascivious relations a bunch, and Kurumi gets slowly feminized while you get other gems of lines like this. That's no good! It's her ass you should be apologizing to! Even if you're not into the erotic aspects of the manga, I think it's genuinely pretty entertaining just because of how batshit absurd these moment-to-moment events are. From little out-of-nowhere callbacks to Barcode Fighter, unhinged setups and jokes, and also just how incredibly trans this whole thing is. Like, yeah, obviously Sakura is there and she's a cosmic void of gender fuckery, but I really wasn't expecting Kurumi to go from being confused about sexuality to wearing a maid outfit to outright being a girl by the end. The manga's also just really damn well drawn. There's a couple instances of anatomy feeling a bit off, but for the most part there's a lot of superbly well illustrated femboys and trans girls in a whole variety of poses and scenarios. From the loving and intense to the casual and absurd, you can really see Ono's experience at play here, as insincere as that might sound to say when talking about an Edo manga. Overall, it's a pretty fun short ride of good writing, good art, and some very unexpected ties to a long-forgotten series. The only real hurdles I think readers might face is, well, 1, no Edo manga is for everyone, and 2, the translation gave me some mixed vibes. I've only read the first 30 pages or so since I chose to read the story in Japanese, and the translation felt fine-ish from what I saw, but the extremely inconsistent gendering and the way they chose to translate otokonoko really dates this to the early 2010s. With that out of the way, however, we have one more story to cover to get the full Barcode Fighter lore, one that spans 2 volumes at a total of almost 400 pages, and actually gives us a glimpse of what happened to Sakura in her adult life, as well as an entirely new set of characters to follow, and it's maybe the most unhinged thing I've ever read, to the point I can't actually talk about everything. Anal Justice and its sequel tell the story of Tachibana Nanao, an otokonoko who goes to an all-girls high school. They live their life there as just an average girl until one day they decide to peek into one of the bizarre clubs and find out an open secret of this school. Many of the girls there are fudas. After being voluntarily indoctrinated into the club with a ceremony of, copulation, and confessing their love to their classmate Itsuka, the series follows the two of them and the rest of the Boki Karabu members through their daily life and all of their hijinks for school until graduation, from the internal drama to conflicts of other clubs, including the mysterious Tama Karabu, made up exclusively of otokonoko. While this might at first seem like a completely unrelated work to Barcode Fighter, you'd be sorely mistaken, as the second volume reintroduces Sakura as a character, now president of the Tama Karabu, and a hot teacher that seduces her students. Which is a little bit worrying, but sure, it's Edo manga, and it happened in Anal Angel. It's far from the worst thing here. The important thing for us barheads is that this manga actually gives her character proper closure and a slight explanation to what happened between Anal Angel and this. Apparently the two just fell off from each other over time, which lines up pretty well with what's shown in Sakura Jiru and later expounded on in Anal Angel. And from there, it seems like she moved on, made new friends with her students, and at the end of all of it, flew out to America to study meat sticks more than she could in Japan. Is that the conclusion I expected, or even the conclusion that we needed? Perhaps not, but I can't imagine it ending in any other way, knowing the kind of wild shit Ono creates when not given limitations, like the rest of this manga. This is frankly the most unhinged and yabai shit I've ever read, and I think I love it. There's so much I can't talk about on YouTube no matter how much I self-censor, because this manga goes so goddamn far that even I, a terribly desensitized Edo-gay reviewing 22-year-old trans woman, had to take a step back and just laugh at the whole thing while also feeling some deep confusion at why the hell was I reading this? At the same time though, I kind of admire it for how shameless it is with what it is. It's absurd smut that has as many of the author's kinks as possible, and perhaps even some he doesn't have just for laughs, with an absurd plot that only gets more absurd as it goes on, eventually ending with Nanao going into a coma due to withdrawals from severe addiction to balls. A coma that can only be solved by everyone from the disparate Tama and Boki clubs channeling their power together and coding Nanao back to health as they experience an existential crisis. The way both this and Barcode Fighter embrace absurdity and play into it with a self-serious tone results in less of a shock when jumping from one to the next than you might think. Certainly, having lewd debauchery everywhere as opposed to cool mecha fights is Very different, but much like how the disparate film genres of horror and comedy both use similar techniques and styles with different execution and intent, the action scenes of Barcode Fighter and the content of Anal Justice feel like they have a similar flow, pacing readers through the usage of dialogue, carefully deploying creative angles and striking shots to make specific moments stand out, and building up intensity until a final climax is reached, all feels similar to his work on the source material. And plus, just like BF, there's a good sense of humor through the self-serious attitude juxtaposing with the absurdity of what's happening. And let's be real here, this drama is hilarious and dumb. Am I ever going to be able to take a struggle between one club filled with fudas and another filled with otokonoko seriously? Not really, but since it doesn't call itself into question, it's easy to get sucked in and devour all 400 pages or so over the course of 1 or 2 sessions, waiting for the next wild thing to happen with tiny little punchlines and bits along the way. For instance, this otaku store that sells master-grade toys, or the Piss Rainbow, or my absolute favorite, how the manga suddenly starts soapboxing about how to have safe intercourse towards the end of the first volume, and the chapter ends on this incredible line. Unfortunately, in Japan, you cannot buy contraceptive pills without a doctor's prescription. And I really can't talk about this without talking about the quality of the art itself. It's a lot less, refined compared to the other 2 works, with an incredibly immense amount of wonderful scrunklies to enjoy, the bits of awkward anatomy here and there, and generally feeling a hell of a lot less polished than either of those. I think that just adds to the charm though. I feel like if you're still reading old Arrow manga, you're either a boomer, you're really desperate for more content of one extremely specific thing, or you're someone like me who's doing it out of morbid curiosity and research and appreciates the finer scrunkles in life. I'm not here to see pristine artwork of characters I know and love. I'm here for nuggets of lore buried in a story where age gap self-cessed in one's mind palace is okay, but pregnancy is where the line is drawn. All in all though, Barcode Fighter is one of the wildest rides I've ever embarked on. From the initial discovery of Ono's work, to the sheer joy I got from seeing all the wild shonen fights unfold, to how excited I was at the turn Sakura's character took, to the utter mindfuck that was reading the follow-ups, I sincerely cannot think of a franchise that is more on brand for this channel that is not an edoge. Unfortunately, getting the series is kind of a challenge these days. If you want legit physical copies and not just scans online, then you'll have not so great luck finding anything on English auctions and shopping websites, and within Japan you can expect to pay anywhere from 2,500 to 6,000 yen for the complete series in either the 5 or 2 volume formats. I hope that someday eventually the series will get re-released online, which I feel isn't impossible given that Ono is apparently still around and kicking, as is Epako and Koro Koro Komiku. There was even a small sequel chapter in 2016, presumably set before any of the Edo Doujin and Edo manga, released in an issue of Koro Koro, though unfortunately this is also difficult to get, and I'm already running way too late on this video to wait for a copy of that to arrive. Also, I don't want to spend the money. If anyone does have a copy though, then please let me know and I would love to check it out. Same with any other Ono work that isn't available online, especially the Magic the Gathering one. By some unstoppable force of horny, however, the most accessible Barcode Fighter media is actually all of the Edo manga. There's English translations floating about of all but Sakura Jiru, scans are easy to find, and secondhand copies of the more substantial works go for less than 1,000 yen a pop, and they're pretty plentiful. Are those recommendable? Well, as with any media whose focus is specifically on being hot, it's kinda hard to say yes or no. If you like otokonoko and trans girls doing lewd things, then there's a lot to love, but Anal Justice specifically is, well, like I said, it's very yabai, and I can't recommend it to anyone who has not completely lost their fucking marbles like I have. At any rate, putting all the other content aside, I really can't recommend Barcode Fighter enough. I think it's not only a damn fine kids battle shonen, but just a fine action manga in general. Ono's got a real talent for writing engaging characters and captivating fights that, when coupled with some shockingly sincere writing of great depth, strong pacing, and an endearing sense of humor, it all comes together to create something that I think would be lovable to anyone who's interested in something a little offbeat, but full of heart. And of course, there's the matter of Sakura. She's one of the most complex and interesting portrayals of a trans girl that I've seen, with the character arcs that her and Kai go through being cemented in my head as some of the best trans content I've read. And that alone is worth checking this out for.